All right. Hello, everybody. Just getting set up over here out on the patio. Today, we're going to do a free training on how you guys can improve the number of client leads that you get, how you can improve your conversions, and how you can actually get caregivers to show up for more interviews. What's up, Loretta? So if you guys are on here, comment hello. If you're watching the replay, hashtag replay. But here's one skill that's going to help you guys with all of this, right? And I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of like not just why it's important, but also what are some of the skills and some of the little nuances of doing this correctly in your business. So the skill is all about asking questions. One of the most important critical skills for any salesperson, even if don't look at yourself as a salesperson, and I want to address that in a second, but even if you don't look at yourself as a salesperson, any single person on here, if you're a business owner, if you're a salesperson, if you're the scheduler, if you're the recruiter, right? This skill will help you in life, okay? So what am I talking about? It's all about asking the right questions. So let me first get this first thing out of the way. All right, the first thing I want to get out of the way is helping you guys understand the term sales, right? This term sales, it's got this negative connotation, right? How many of you guys, come to the chat box if this is you, how many of you guys, in some shape, manner, or form, you have heard the term sales and it made the hair stand up on the back of your neck or it made you cringe a little bit? So I want you guys to understand this. I say this all the time in my trainings because it's true. We've all had a bad experience with a salesperson, right? At least I think I have. How many of you guys have had a bad experience with a salesperson? I'll share my story in a bit. But it's because people don't do this thing that I'm about to share with you, right? And what happens is they have their own initiative. They have their own thing that they're trying to get from you. And it comes across in a way that's very uncomfortable, pushy sometimes, and people, when you think of a salesperson, you think of like a used car salesman. That's not what we do, especially in home care. I don't think anyone on here is like the used car salesman type. But the problem is if you go to the opposite end of the spectrum and you don't have the skills to ask the right questions and do it in the right way, then what ends up happening is that you, and this is what I used to do early on in my career. It's like I finally had a chance to talk to a social worker, case manager, and I start just like blah, 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 blah. And I start throwing up all over them about like, we do this, we do that, we do that. And the truth of the matter is that they're like, so, I mean, they didn't say that, but I can tell by their energy levels that it's like, they didn't really care. And there's a reason why they didn't care. It's because I wasn't asking the right questions on the front end. Another example of this is when I would be calling on accounts, right? I remember this one account, I've shared this story before, but Melissa from, I think it was Fletcher Health and Rehab, the name's changed, but I would go there and I would literally try to, I'd bring her coffee, I'd, go in there, she'd always let me in and let me talk to her. And I would get so excited about like, okay, she's finally talking to me. This means I'm going to get referrals. And she had sent me like one, maybe two referrals. And months later, I was like, hey, Melissa, I said, I've been coming here for a while. I think you're awesome. You're great. I said something like, I've gotten like maybe two referrals since I've been here. I don't know if you guys have, any more. She's like, Greg, she's like, I send you everything that I have. I was like, oh, you do? And I really think she was telling the truth. And she was like, yeah, we just have a very low income population that comes through here. I was like, wow. And the reality is that if I would have asked the right qualifying and pre-qualifying questions on the front end, I would have known this, right? And I wouldn't have invested so much time and energy trying to talk to Melissa. Yeah, this glare is like bothering me. Trying to talk to Melissa. And this happens all the time, right? There are many of you that are in sales that are out there calling referral sources. And this isn't just about referral sources, guys. We're going to talk about how this applies to caregivers, how this applies to prospective clients. Like, this is some really, really important stuff. I really, truly believe one of the most critical skills any of you can learn, it's asking the right questions. All right. So let's talk about this for a second. Okay. Sorry, my dogs. I work from home. My dog's like trying hard to get out here. All right, so if you guys are on here live, comment in the chat box. I want to see who's on here live. Tell me where you're calling in from. Comment in the chat box. Loretta, I see you're on here. A bunch of other people. Just say hello, hello, hello. All right, so in truth, in reality, whether it's dealing with the referral source, whether it's dealing with the prospective client, whether it's dealing with the caregiver, whoever it is, part of our role and responsibility, part of the true definition of sales is getting to understand what their problem is, what their desire is, what they want, and then if we can, providing it to them. That's it in a nutshell. How is that a bad thing, right? That's like you talking to your significant other and you're like, hey, what do you want to drink? Right? She's like, I'd like some tea or some coffee, right? It's all it is. We're identifying what they want, what their desire is, and then we're communicating how we can possibly give it or provide it to them. That's what sales is at the core. So any of you that have this misnomer about sales, it's so pushy, it's manipulative, it's not that. It's that for people who are being not inauthentic, for people that are being unethical, right? Or that they're trying to push their own initiative. Yes, of course. If we're out there marketing, yeah, we want to get the referrals. But I think the bigger thing is if we're operating from a place of serving and recognizing that we ultimately want to serve people and that we have something of value to offer, that's the motivating factor, right? Or that should be one of your primary motivating factors. So let's talk about different types of questions. You got open-ended questions, which is like, hey, what do you like about blah, 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 right? That's an open-ended question. You've got closed-ended questions like yes or no that usually require yes or no answers. So something like, hey, are you willing to send us your next referral? Something along those lines. It's a closed-ended question. And then you got follow-up questions. So there's a whole bunch of different types of questions. All right. Now, let me get into some of the nitty-gritty of how we use questions. All right. Now, again, reminder, these things can all be used on when we're talking to referral sources, prospective clients, if we're talking to a caregiver, and we explain how this applies. All right. First thing first is why we use questions. I'm going to give you about 5 or 6 reasons to use them and kind of how to use them. All right. First thing is we use questions to maintain some level of control. That sounds a little egotistical, but at the core, it's not really about quote unquote control. It's about identifying and understanding what they really, really want, what they really, really need. So I'll give you guys some more concrete examples of this, but when we start to use questions the right way, we can identify control. So comment in the chat box. So I need to see some chats here. How many of you have been on a call with a prospective client? For those of you that do private pay business, how many of you have been on a call with a prospective client and one of the first questions out of their mouth is, how much? What do you charge? Or even with a potential referral source, but let's just use prospective client. Comment in the chat box if that's ever happened to you where you were on with a prospective client and one of the first things they said is, well, what do you charge? How much? How much is this? All right. I know for those of you that have been in business, it had to at least have happened once. For me, I'm going to say it happened a lot, right? Where someone's like, okay, well, what do you guys actually charge? So I'm going to teach you guys how you can sort of flip this. And one of the skills for being able to do that is you do it by asking questions. Now, let me share a very specific example just on intake calls, okay? Because you use this with referral sources to be able to pre-qualify and understand them a little bit better. You use it on intake calls. You use it with your, I call them your dream team partners. These are not necessarily social workers or case managers, other people that you can partner with. But if you do the meetings correctly, you're asking questions and you're maintaining control of the conversation. These are done on living room visits. These are done on your pre-screening calls with caregivers, okay? So you want to maintain some semblance or some level of quote-unquote control without it feeling like it's being egotistical or narcissistic, all right? But asking questions, so let's just say someone inquires and they say, hey, what's your rate? What's your price? What do you guys charge? One of the ways to flip it is to just say, hey, That's a great question. Right now, I don't know about you guys. We had a range of rates. Some of you have just one set rate. We had companion, we had hands-on care, and then we charged less for shifts that were like shorter shifts. Many of you won't even touch shorter shifts. We did because we could, and it wasn't that difficult for us. But in shorter shifts, we charged more per hour. So I said that's a great question. Part of that depends on the level of care that's needed and the number of hours per day or per week that's being utilized. And in order to be able to give you a more accurate number, I need to learn a little bit more about your mom, your dad, you, whoever's calling up. And then we start to segue into questions. Does that make sense? Comment in the chat box if that makes sense. That's part of how we leverage questions. It's a way to maintain some semblance of control of the conversation. Why? Because if you don't do that, right, and they're pressing you to give you your price or to talk about your company or to do this or to do that, you're sharing a bunch of stuff that may not matter to them. That's just the truth. You're sharing a bunch of stuff that in reality may not matter to them, right? So let's just use a caregiver as an example, right? You're going to tell them, oh, we got this 401k program. We got, PTO. We got caregiver of the year, blah, blah, blah. And we've not asked questions to find out what they really, really, really want. And because we haven't done that, we don't know what they want. So we just give them a potpourri of all the stuff that we have and all the stuff that we offer. And then when it gets down to it, we're blurting out a bunch of stuff that sounds really, really cool. Like, oh, that stuff's cool, right? You got 401k. Awesome, right? Caregiver of the year. Awesome. Good stuff. But for them, all that matters is flexibility in their schedule. So you talked about all this stuff, which is really good stuff, but you didn't get to the point of understanding what it is that they desire and what they want. So you talked about all this stuff, and then you wonder why they didn't actually show up for the interview. And you're like, oh man, the caregivers didn't show up for the interview. And you're like, wonder what that's about. Well, part of it, in many cases, is because you did not control the conversation. You did not ask the right questions to really get to the root of identifying their desires, their pain points, their needs, their wants. Okay? When people are doing something, whether it's getting a job or buying a product or buying a service, they're moving towards something, right? Pleasure, desires, or they're moving away from something, moving away from pain, moving away from discomfort, right? Comment in the chat box if that makes sense. Comment in the chat box. Let me know if that makes sense to you guys. And I can't. Yeah, let me know if that makes sense. So people are either moving towards something that they want or desire or away from pain. And if you're blah, 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 without getting to the root of what they want, that's impacting your conversions. That's impacting whether you get referrals. That's impacting whether your caregivers show up for interviews. I promise. All right. Next thing is, it kind of segues. We sort of talked about this in some shape, manner, or form, but asking questions is designed partially, if you do it the right way, it's to isolate areas of interest. Again, it's their desires, it's their wants, it's their needs, right? How do you ultimately find out what people really, really want if you're not asking the right questions? You can't. You're just playing a guessing game, right? For those people that are really good at getting caregivers to show up for interviews, getting clients to convert, a big part of that is understanding what they want and then talking about or communicating about how you might be able to offer and address that. All right. That's hitting the hammer right on the head of the nail. But most of you are kind of doing this. All right, well, if I tell them about my 401k, if I tell them about how we've got a nurse on call 24/7, if I tell them about these things, they're good things. Those are my quote unquote differentiators, right? That should matter to them, but it may not, right? And until you get to the root of asking questions the right way, you're not going to identify that. All right, so another part of this, these are little nuances with sales and selling, is acknowledging or acknowledging a fact, okay? So You might say, hey, you mentioned that this was important to you. That's true. Is that a yes or a no? Right? So we ask question, is that to acknowledge and get them to acknowledge a fact. Part of why we're doing this sort of segues into the next thing, which is gaining agreement. But ultimately, we're trying to ask questions just to get clarification about things. And you should be doing this throughout your process, whatever your process is, right? The people who struggle with sales and the people who actually hate it the most are the ones that are like, I don't want to get up in front and talk to people. Right? How many of you guys have said that in some shape, manner, or form? Like, I don't want to get up in front and talk to people. Well, the best people who are good at sales are the ones who actually just ask questions. Now, at some point, you want to present a solution, but get really, really good at asking questions. They get to do the talking. You don't have to be uncomfortable. But as they're talking, we're gathering information, we're taking notes, and then we ask questions to just confirm that we heard what they said and that we're acknowledging the facts. Okay? The other part of it, which like I said, we segue into this, is minor agreements, right? You get people to say, yes, 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 this is true, yes, this is true. We're just gaining agreement along the way, right? Would you agree? So if I was talking to you guys, would you agree that it's gotten harder for caregivers to show up for interviews? Yes, right? Would you agree that there's still some things that can be done to improve your results, right? Now, again, we would have had prior conversations about this and had some dialogue. So I wouldn't ask that question unless I was confident your answer would be yes. So we ask questions along the way to gain agreement. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that as we talk and as we have conversations, even if you're in the talking phase of presenting your solution, still asking questions along the way, it helps you with two things. It helps you with engagement, right? So they're still with you. And it gets you both creating minor agreements, right? The more we create these little minor agreements, the more rapport is getting built, the more confidence is getting built, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So another reason why we do ask questions is we do it to isolate objections. Now, what do I mean by that? People inherently are conditioned to say no, or to find an excuse, or to find a reason why they won't do something. We're just a condition. It's like, okay, someone's trying to sell you something, and most people are conditioned to just be like, okay, I don't want to do this because blah, blah, blah. So oftentimes we talk ourselves out of buying something. Right? You've all done it in some shape, manner, or form. Okay, now obviously we don't want to buy something that we really don't want or need, but even if it's something that we kind of desire, we're conditioned to find reasons why. So when we ask the question, someone might say, the color. So our job, our role is to say, okay, so you mentioned, here, I'll give you guys a specific example to home care, right? They might have said something like, well, I have to get mom, I don't know how mom's going to be or feel or about this. So one of the questions I might ask is, have you had conversations about mom about receiving care? What are her thoughts on this? Okay. It's just an example of asking questions to isolate objection. Or you mentioned that your sister is concerned about, spending mom and dad's money. So I'd ask a question about that. So tell me a little bit more about that. So we start to use questions to isolate objections. And I don't like the term objections, right? There's some sales books out there that talk about, you got to have 10 objections or a certain amount of objections to get closer to the yes. Or I do believe this. I really do. I think that quote unquote objection or someone bringing something up, it's just their need for more clarification, right? They just need more clarification about something. That's it. It's not a no. It's just about getting more clarification. Does that make sense? Comment in the chat box if that makes sense. So one of the other pieces for asking questions, so this is number 6 on my list, it's something called leading questions. Comment in the chat box. How many of you guys are familiar with using leading questions? Have you ever used it before? Do you know what it is? So essentially, all a leading question is it's a question where we kind of already know the answer. All right, let me give you a more concrete and more specific example. Right, it's a question where we already know the answer, and how we use these, or how I use these, is to bring people closer to their own conclusion that my solution is the right answer. Now, let me explain what I mean by this. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Let's just say hypothetically, right? So just so you guys know, my home care business, we had one of our core differentiators is we had a wellness program, right? And we focused on 5 key areas: safety, nutrition, physical activity, mental activity, socialization. So we had this wellness program. It was one of our core differentiators. It worked really, really well in the marketplace with referral sources, with clients. Like, it was awesome. And what I would do with someone on an intake call is, if I'm asking questions in the front end and I'm identifying, okay, tell me more about your mom and dad. So that's an open-ended question. Tell me more about your mom and dad. What's going on? Open-ended question. And then I start to ask things like, what are they taking medications for? What's their quote-unquote diagnosis? Right? So they're telling me the story about mom and dad. Well, dad's had falls. He's a diabetic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm paying attention. All right. So what are you afraid of? Oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to go to work and my dad's going to trip and fall and break a hip or break it. Okay. So I'm gathering information. I'm asking questions. I'm gathering information. So at this point, I have a clear understanding of like what's going on in their world, right? I've got a clear understanding of what's happening and what's going on in their world. And I haven't sold anything yet. I'm just formulating in my mind, how can I serve these people, right? What is it that I offer that's unique, that's different, or not, that can serve these people? So we finally get to the point of, talking about some of our services, and I say, hey, you mentioned that your mom or your dad had a couple falls and you're worried about, you going to work and him falling and breaking his hip or something like that. So, one of the things that we do, or when we're working with our clients, is one of our big focuses is making sure that our clients are getting enough activity and exercise to ensure that their muscles don't atrophy. So I'm not sending a physical therapist to the home, but they might have exercises that a therapist has prescribed, or we might get them up and just do some progressive walking, et cetera, et cetera. Is that something that would matter to you? That's a leading question, because I know the answer, right? I already know they're going to say yes, like this is something that would matter to me, because they've already told me the whole story. Comment in the chat box if this actually makes sense to you guys. So I'm leading them in a direction, right? So I'm leading them down this path of talking about my wellness program. Now, there's other things I would talk about in terms of, like, they said their dad was a diabetic. Then there's other pieces that are like, would having someone make sure that your mom's blood sugar levels are in check, or your dad's blood sugar levels are in check, is that something that would matter to you? Again, a leading question. I know it's part of what we would be doing as part of our care plan and our wellness program, but I'm asking them questions. I'm kind of leading them down that path. So they're like, yeah, this is cool. This is cool. I'm not telling them it should be important to them, right? I'm not telling them and just throwing up like, hey, we've got this wellness program. We do this, we do that, we do that. Blah, 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 blah. I'm not doing that. I'm leading them down a path. And I'm doing that in part by asking leading questions. All right. Does that make sense? Comment in the chat box if this makes sense, if this is connecting, if this is registering for you. Right? So this is one piece, right? One skill with any of you guys, whether you're doing intake calls or living room visits or meeting with referral partners. Mastering this skill, or even just getting good at it, asking the right questions, is a big part of like what we teach in truth, in everything that we do. Right? Just about everything that we do, our sales process, our recruiting process that we teach, because it's a key component. to getting more referrals and getting more caregivers and finding and keeping more caregivers to stay on the team. Because if you understand what they want and you're able to communicate with them in a way that it hits the hammer on the head, because we're addressing their needs, their desires, their wants, their specific wants, it's all done by asking the right questions. Okay? So I hope this is helpful for you guys. Those of you that are in a place where you're like, hey, I want more help, whether it's with sales or recruiting or working with other home care CEOs and sharing ideas and best practices with each other. I run multiple mastermind groups where I've got home care owners from across the country, really across all over the place, who share ideas and best practices. If that's something you want more information on, comment in the chat box below. Let me know. Say, hey, yeah, I'm interested. Yes, I want to learn more about this. Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, just so we know, I'll have my team or myself or someone on my team reach out to you guys. I hope that this was helpful. Honestly, guys, this is a skill that if you learn how to ask the right questions in any of those areas that we're talking about, intake calls, recruiting, process, all of these things matter, right? They all matter. And they're going to help you improve your numbers. The two primary drivers in a home care business is recruiting and sales. I promise you. Like, those are the primary things, right? Constantly getting and converting leads and constantly finding and keeping caregivers. All the other things matter, right? Nurturing, customer service, billing, payroll, et cetera, et cetera. But if you are looking to grow and scale your business, those are two primary drivers. And when you understand and learn how to master those areas in your business, it's not like those are the things that will take your company to the next level. Now, there's other foundational pieces that go into this, like you got to have the right team, and have the right people in the right seats of the bus. You got to have the right KPIs and all that stuff we talk about in our mastermind groups. But the starters are, boom, get and convert leads, find and keep caregivers. Okay. Hope that makes sense. Again, let me know if you guys want more information about any of the stuff that we do or mastermind groups, etc. Let me know if this is helpful for you. Comment in the chat box, and hope you guys have an amazing rest of your week. Bye-bye.